All right, we're in Ephesians. Let's go with chapter 6 today. Just as we back up a little bit, Paul is in prison when he is writing this letter, and it's not a letter just for the people in Ephesus. He spent, as far as the history of his life we know of, this is where he spent most of his time in his ministry. It was in Ephesus. It was only about 3 years. Paul was a traveler. He could not stay in one place at a time, and he constantly sent his assistants, those he was mentoring, Timothy, Titus, even Apollos, back to Ephesus to check on things quite often. So he kept very close contact with these people. Now that he's in prison, they're sending aid packages to him. Because if you got any niceties or comforts of any kind, you didn't get it from those imprisoning you or guarding you. You got it from people who cared, and in some cases put their life on the line to come visit you. Because prisons were not healthy places. So they took their own health in their hands just to come visit you. So it was to them a life and death situation, if they were in prison, for you to come and visit. You know, it wasn't just a nicety. They brought him aid time and again from these places, Ephesus and Philippi and Thessalonica, he says.
And when we were in Kenya, we had an opportunity to visit the local jail because one of our members had been falsely accused and put in jail. It was literally a couple of concrete block walls with steel bars with a trench running down through it that they ran water through once a day to put out the waste.
Mm-hmm.
Any food, any medication, anything needed, the family had to bring. They didn't supply anything.
Mm-hmm.
Not even no meals,
right.
No water, nothing. So the family had to provide everything for them.
Mm-hmm.
If you didn't have family,
you were destitute and you died in prison.
Where
yeah.
was that?
Kenya.
Kenya, yeah. Yeah.
There was an American who got arrested over there, and he petitioned the embassy to have him move back to, extradited to America, so he could go to prison in America.
Well, there was a guy we worked with a lot in our recovery groups that would purposefully steal something, so he had a place to stay at night. He got food and he got health care. Okay, these prisons were quite different back in Paul's day. So for him and Silas to be singing at night, that caught everybody's attention. You didn't hear that every day. That was strange, to say the least. That was even after being whipped and scourged and put in stocks and bonds, where if you leaned back, well, that's what they whipped, so it hurt. You had to hold yourself up. Well, you were weak from the punishment, and so you couldn't always do it. It was not a comfortable place. It was not a place where you bided your time. The only time that did work for Paul is when he was arrested and protected by the Roman government before they could get him to Rome for trial, because they knew that the area there was not going to produce any kind of justice whatsoever for Paul. Then at that time, he was protected by being under arrest, and he was allowed in Rome to have his own place. This is not the case here where he is with Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and the little one-page letter to his friend who hosted the church in his house, a guy named Philemon. And it is a very strongly attested tradition that a little guy named Onesimus in the story of Philemon, who ran away and was tossed in prison in Rome, met up with Paul at the time. He was going to be returned to his master, who was a Christian. Yeah, I think in Colossae, wasn't it? He hosted the church there. And Paul wrote the letter saying, your servant has now become Christian. I expect you to treat him like one. And I'm going to come and visit when I get out here and see how things are going. The very strong tradition in the early church that Onesimus was the one. Philemon not only followed Paul's advice, but really changed the concept in the area of how to treat those under your charge. And Onesimus collected any letters he knew of from the other churches that Paul had written to. And what helped putting the New Testament together with all of Paul's letters was Onesimus' work of collecting them all. There are others we don't have. He mentions other letters he's written and sent. We don't have those, what he mentions in there. So there were quite a few others. So we take it by faith, we've got what we need. But it was Onesimus met Paul in prison. We usually think prison's pretty much the worst deal you could get. God should spare us, the good people, from that sort of thing. And yet, it was the impetus for how many New Testament letters. And Paul using his example when he was in prison, not to be a disgrace to the society and to the rest of the group, but to use it as an opportunity. Can you imagine if you were the guard, getting there at first of the day, going through the work group meeting, pulling your name and finding out it was your turn to guard Paul today? So, I got to listen to this guy. They probably threatened him and punched him and pushed him around to shut him up. But you could lock him up, but you couldn't shut him up. Paul used every opportunity he had, even prison, even the dungeons, to be an example of how to present the gospel of Christ. And so these last couple of chapters in Ephesians are all about our behavior. Just as a way of reminder, just to lead into chapter 6. Chapter 5, he starts out saying, be imitators of God. Okay, you're going to be persecuted, and it's going to be your family who does it. The people you least likely expect are going to be the ones who turn you in. Christianity was a scandal in the first century. Even eating of the Lord's Supper was looked upon by the Romans, and the Jews promoted the concept of cannibalism. They're eating this guy's body and drinking his blood. Well, the tomb was empty. The body was somewhere. And that was disgusting to them as it is to us. But that's what the Christians were punished for. Their early Christian histories. Even Josephus mentions spies going into these meeting places, and those who ate the body and drank the blood were listed and then arrested and put to death. Paul claims that he was part of that party who helped in that ahead of time. But now he's on the other side of the page. So be imitators of God. Show that, okay, this is the circumstance you find yourself in. Use it to the best opportunity you have. Paul can even say that in Philippians, in his letter to Philippi, it's actually turned out to be a good thing for me to be here. Because a lot of people who wouldn't have been preaching the gospel are out there taking my place now. And a lot of people in the prisons have accepted the gospel of Christ. So that's how he looked at it. We look at our bad situations and troubles as hindrances to the gospel. Paul did everything he could to try to train his mind to see them as good things. And so he's constantly, in his letters, soliciting the other Christians to watch your behavior. Act right. Okay, the pagan worship assemblies were drunken orgies. Not for you. No, be filled with the Spirit and show people the right way to live. And not just there, but the last half of chapter 5 into the first part of 6 is how you behave outside of the assembly. Husbands and wives are to be a team of equal measure, working together. Now, the men are responsible to God as the leadership, but they don't use the wives as subservient slaves. They work together. Husbands, we're to love our wives. And I'll say it again. I said it before a couple weeks ago when we looked at it. It bothers me that every time the husband-wife relationship is talked about, he has to tell the husbands to love their wives. That bothers me. Because if he says it once, it's important. But if he says it every time, it's a problem. And it was a big problem first century. Also then, As it goes down to chapter 6, it begins. Again, this just review. It's at the end of your outline that I gave you on chapter 5. Children, obey your parents so that you may live long. Why would that be the case?
Because they'll take care of you.
They'll take care of you and
Instruct you how to follow God's word.
okay, and you could be smarter and wiser on how to live life, but also one of the 10 Commandments. And under the law of Moses, a child who did not obey his parents was to be taken outside the city and thrown rocks at until they died. We have no history of where the parents did that to their kids, but the threat was there as being that important for the authority to be respected. And so
You don't believe in that nowadays. The kids raise themselves.
they do, and I think a lot of it is because our culture's gotten to the point where parents are just too distracted with other things. And for me, Satan, 3 things that Satan does. One is distortion. Did God really say you were going to die when you eat from a tree? Yeah, you're not going to die. And they didn't, did they? Physically. Yeah. He used distortion. He used distraction. When did Peter start sinking after he was walking on water?
He left his eyes off.
He took his eyes off Jesus and started sinking. Yeah, he's just a normal man then when you don't have your focus on God. Distortion, distraction, I didn't have it in my notes here. The third one is a D word. Oh, discouragement. Yeah. Just like in any sports game, if you can discourage the other team, you've got an advantage. You can wear them out. Yeah. And that's what Satan does. He bides his time, and he's good at it. So Paul says we have to keep up the guard. And I think today parents are just way too distracted with everything that has to be done. Nowadays, without 2 incomes, you can't afford a place to live. I don't mean anything disrespectful to you about this, but that's why we're back in Ohio. Because 1 income could not afford a place in New York City. Yeah, and I wasn't going to live in 2 different places. So, anyway, when it comes to the children, then you have to obey the parents. But again, verse 4 of chapter 6, right back to the dads again. Women tend to have a knack for taking care of family. The guys, we've got to be reminded. Don't exasperate your children. Don't push them to the point where they want to take off and leave. A guy who is now a Buddhist monk, but Cat Stevens, wrote a song back in the 70s, so about father and son relationship. And they're talking to each other, but they're not listening to each other. And the son, he says, I've had it, I've got to go. And that is unfortunately part of our culture.
I don't exactly understand 2 and 3.
2 and 3.
Honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
One of the 10 Commandments says that you honor your father and your mother, or you'll be put to death. The promise, you'll be put to death.
And then the third says that it may go well that you may live long in the land.
Mm-hmm.
What's that got to do with
Well, if you're put to death, you're not going to live very long. But if you do have the training and nurturing and admonition of your parents, you have the wisdom to face life. You have their help to get through life. You have the impetus, the knowledge.
There's a lot of wrong people living in our old age.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I look in the mirror and have to trade that guy, too. I get a little bit sidetracked and have to be brought back to reality. It was a good thing I had Kathy as a team player, especially with the daughters. I'd come back into the room with her and say, what is going on? She's 12. She took care of it. But, when it came to our son, it was the same thing with me. Yeah, I was able to get through to where she couldn't. And so it was a team effort. They were able to live long in the land. I hope we gave them training on how to live life. and be a good example. Now it's up to them to live it out, and it's not any sign on my training. I have to realize they're responsible now for where their ultimate destiny ends. I can continue to encourage them. If I cut them off, I won't have that opportunity again. You have to leave the door open and allow people the opportunity to return. When we went to my friend's memorial service a month ago, there was a man there. His daughters, he beats himself up for being too harsh with them. And now he told me one of them has softened and is deciding to come back. And I said, aren't you glad you didn't burn the bridge and close the door? Because now she has opportunity. So there again, living long, not just in this land, but in the next.
Tell my grandson, asked my question once after he did something a little too smart. I said, my background is in wildlife. I said, in the deer herd, guess which ones get killed first? I don't know. I said, the young dogs.
Those that wander from the herd. Yeah, well, and that's same in the wild. When the wolves attack the herd of sheep, they don't go after the whole herd. I mean, banded together, they're a formidable foe. They wait for one to wander off. That's why Jesus has the parable about one sheep that wandered, and the shepherd just couldn't sleep till he got it back. He left the 99 alone because they were well protected. And the same thing is with our family of Christians. Too often some churches are way too quick to disfellowship. Well, you're casting them to the wolves. You're cutting off ties, leaving them all alone. We really have to be very careful. Okay. Anyway, the slaves and masters part. I'm very careful to understand and to project to you that that's not what we define as a slave in our country. We've gone through that and we fought a war over that issue. This is more, it's better to consider in this context here as an employer and an employee. Back then it wasn't always that you worked for someone and got money. Sometimes you got, circuit riders in the early part of our country. They would go to different churches. They were circuit riders, and they would be paid with a chicken or a cloak or given a mule. Okay, it was bartering, basically. And when you needed supplies for your family, you worked for a certain person, and they provided you with the means to provide what you needed. A lot of time it was money. And under the law of Moses, the employer was required to pay the employee before they went home that night. One of Jesus' parables really rocks our boat in this country about fairness. People worked all day and got paid the same as people who only worked an hour. But the master said, it's my money. I can pay people what I want. I guarantee you those guys who worked all day for this guy ain't going to work for him next day. That's just the way Americans are. But God's reward is the same to everybody. Whether you've been in this all of your life or Jesus came just after you were converted. It's the same. Heaven is heaven. All right. Anyway, how did we get there? Slaves and masters. Okay. If you're an employee, okay, work. Well, when it was at the airline, there were a lot of flight attendants and pilots who didn't want to wear the uniform the way the company said to wear it. They wanted to, have badges and all these causes that they were involved in promoted and stuff like that. So, but did you take their money? Yeah. Well, then they have the right to tell you how they want you to promote them. Yeah. You signed an agreement that you would do this. Do it. And do the good job, regardless of if you get rewarded or not. Do it because someone else, your ultimate master, is watching. And don't try to get away with it. And I guess that's my work ethic. I get teased about working too hard. I could tease back that you guys ain't working at all. But I just let that go as my reward for putting in my time and doing something for the money that the company is paying me. That is my part, and it does feel like slavery, doesn't it? Even though I can quit anytime I want to. Masters are to treat you with respect and not overwork you and overburden you and discourage you.
You took me back to when I worked for Murphy Mark, and I physically walked around a girl that was supposed to be working. I had to walk around her to do my job.
I do that all the time.
I did with her.
Okay. Anyway, how you act in your personal relationships says more about your character than when you come together in an assembly and sing our songs, pray with us. Okay. How our worship, how our assembly is in attracting people, meeting needs, is founded on how your life is in your other relationships. When it comes to choosing leaders in the congregation, Paul tells Timothy and Titus the first place you look is in the home. That will tell you how they're going to handle problems, situations in the church. And I have worked for elderships that I seriously am concerned about just because of the home life. And it's not that their children are not faithful, but it's almost as if the parents had driven them away. And you look back in Scripture too. Why did the Israelites in 1 Samuel, why did they want a king?
To lead them.
To lead them. But what was it that pushed them to demand a king? Their leader was Samuel, the great man of God. It says, you're old?
Everybody else has got one, why can't we have one?
Well, that was their reasoning for it. And because they didn't want to go out and fight the battles anymore, they wanted to pay someone else to do it. That's what we do sometimes in the church. You have a religious official and they do all the work. We pay them and they do the work for us and we take the credit. Yeah. That's what it felt like in a couple ministries I had. Now, they told Samuel, they got him together, says, you're old. And his sons were scoundrels. They were evil men. They took bribes. They stole the sacrifices they had no business taking. They slept with the women who served. You're old. Your sons do not walk in your ways. Give us a king.
In a way, can't you see why people would say that?
Mm-hmm.
Why didn't, when the person touched the ark, I mean, he was instantly zapped.
Yep.
What about these? They're not doing their work. Why weren't they punished?
You wonder. You wonder.
Are seeing this, well, God, yeah, this is what you're saying.
Yeah.
You can't even control your family, and what are we supposed to do?
Mm-hmm.
You could see why they would want a king.
Yeah. And when David got older, he was chased through the wilderness by his own son. Wanted to kill him. Was ready to kill him. Okay. These great men of God. That's just two examples. There's a bunch more. Josiah, same thing. Great men of God, very faithful. Terrible fathers. The home life was chaos and a wreck. And it destroyed the nation. It split the nation after Solomon died. So, the home life, this is where it all comes from. So Paul says if we're going to make inroads with the church here. If we're going to fulfill our purpose, Satan's going to try to take us away and put us in prison and discourage us and distract us with problems. But the real issue is your relationships. Do people feel comfortable coming to you? Do they feel confident they can say something that will offend you, but you'll still accept them? I don't know that that's available in a lot of churches. Say something wrong, say something they weren't always taught, and okay, thanks, but we'll find someone else. Let's look at the home life. When we were over at one congregation where I served, I don't know that any of the marriages were stable. They were impressed with Kathy and I. And I can't say we were perfect. I praise her for putting up with me. So, that's where we're looking. This is where the relationships begin, and this is where our Christian character draws its attention, is from our personal relationships. So the husbands and the wives, the children and the parents, and then in the workplace and the marketplace. How we behave outside of the assembly is probably 99% of our Christian activity. We focus on one day a week. Satan's got us the rest of the time. Okay. That brings us then to where our strength really lies, and that begins in chapter 6 and verse 10. And I do have a handout if you want one. You can raise your hand. I'll come around if you want a new handout.
I've got my orange sheet at home.
The orange one's done. Okay. Yeah. Oops. You want one or two? One? You want to share? Okay. Go fight it.
We'll stay close together.
Okay. All right. So here in chapter 6, this is how it goes. Finally, Paul had a lot more to say. You think he said everything he needed to in one letter? He was there for 3 years, and now he's writing a letter to remind them. Finally, in closing, be strong where? Why not in yourself? Aren't you supposed to be strong enough with your faith? Satan's going to eat you alive, because humans cannot put up the strength for a long period of time without weakening and getting weary. So where does our strength have to come from? From being in the Lord, and He in us. We are a formidable foe that Satan, if we stand against him, he flees. And I like the wording in that. It's very descriptive. He doesn't just step back and cower. If we stand against Satan, he flees. Because we have a power that has already defeated him. Do we think of Satan in that way? I'm good. I've got this. Okay, I've got this under control. I can handle it. Satan turns to God and says, let me give him a push. And that's all it takes, isn't it? One guy cutting in traffic. Yeah, that's all it takes. And we're done. So we need to stand strong in the Lord. Yeah.
I heard an illustration about how Satan's always attacking us. And of course, it's not usually blatant and obvious, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It talks about Satan, the fiery darts of Satan.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy listened to speaking said, he's throwing fiery darts at your brain. He said, he's not, just attacking you openly. But those little things of doubt and little things that distract you from God, those are from Satan.
Mm-hmm.
And if you fill your life with God, you can deflect those.
True. Very true.
But Satan is subtle in what he's doing as he attacks you. And those looking for the chinks in the armor that you've got on.
Sure. And you can see it in the news all the time, even with our leaders. All he has to do is just put some kind of doubt in someone's mind.
Yeah.
And And the first place he's going to attack is the home. Got a football player that can't even play a game because everybody's worried about his divorce with his wife. So what? Why are they so obsessed? Well, because this guy seemed to be the perfect family man. Yeah, we don't know his home life. But if they can plant doubt in there, now we can turn our thoughts against him. Satan wins every time. So we need to stand strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. We do not have any power in ourselves. When we sinned, it's because we disconnected the power source, pulled out the plug, and thought we could do it on our own. And then, like the prodigal son, finds himself feeding pigs and wanting to eat what he's feeding them. And he comes to himself. Now he's focused back on his father. He says, I'll go back as a servant. Did the father accept him as a servant?
No.
Made him a son. That's the God we serve. But that's where the power lies, not in us. Always in him. So we need to stand strong. We need to be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Once we start taking credit for ourselves or start thinking, I don't like this philosophy teaching idea, but I'm not comfortable with it, now we're starting to rely on ourselves, aren't we? Letting someone else teach us what it says without looking at it ourselves, challenging it, asking questions, coming to an understanding. We just take it. We're relying on our own power again and not on God's. That's why in our restoration movement, it's what Scripture says. Paul will tell us, don't go beyond what is written, because that's where Satan is, and that's where he eats us. If we stay with what is written, he can't touch us. We don't see it that way, though, do we? We've been taught to believe that Satan is still running around loose, and he is, but he's already defeated. He already knows the outcome. Thing is, he's anxious now. He's trying to get as many as he can before the time's up.
And we think we can do it by ourselves.
We do. And that is the biggest lie that we believe. All right. Verse 11. Have you guys ever had a panoply? A panoply? P-A-N-A-P-L-Y. Any veterans here? You've had a panoply then. You've had a panoply. Pan just means universal, all around. And oply is weapons. When the government issued your weapons and armor to you, you had a panoply. That's what it was in Latin. A full set of tools to do the job you needed to do. That is a panoply. Here, Paul says, put on the panoply of God. English says the full armor. You can't leave any piece off. Can you imagine, though, when you're in your full battle armor all day? Didn't it get wearisome? Right? My brother-in-law said his weighed some 30, 40 pounds you're carrying around with you. But it's all for protection in case the enemy attacks. When do they attack? When you least likely expect it. So you have to have it on all the time. What a drudgery. But we are at war. And there will be no conscientious objectors in heaven. There will be nobody who was on the sidelines giving orders. There were some elders that got offended when I said that. Everyone who survives to the end with Jesus will be battle-hardened, battle-scarred soldiers. So put on the full armor. Don't leave anything off. And even in this list of the pieces of armor, a lot of people leave off the last piece or don't see it as very important. But we'll get there in a second. All right. Put on the panoply of God, the full armor that He provides for you. You don't have to buy it. You don't have to earn it piece by piece. When we are in Christ, it's all put together on top of us. And it's not the physical stuff, because He'll say, this is not a physical fight that we're in. But we get so distracted with the physical, don't we? Put on the panoply of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. You were talking about putting in your mind. The devil's schemes. That is what we're fighting against. Our struggle, and this is where we fail all the time. Modern day church, I'm afraid, fails right here. Our struggle is not against flesh and blood. Who's flesh and blood?
We are.
Yet when I say something people don't like, who do they attack?
You.
Elton John had a song one time, says, "Don't shoot me, I'm just the piano player." You don't like the music? Sorry. Yeah. Why do we attack people?
Because they're there.
They're saying things we don't like. Take them out of circulation. That's what they tried to do with the Apostle John, put him on the island of Patmos. And yet we got the last book in our scriptures because he was sitting there all by himself and Jesus appeared to him. We got 13 letters from Paul, many of them written while he was pulled out of circulation. A lot of what the advances were in the early church happened when many of the apostles were martyred. But that's who we usually fight. That's who we usually blame. And it's not them. Do you know of any false teacher or cult leader, even in our time, that one day decided, you know what, I'm going to go out, I'm going to be a false teacher. I want to be a false teacher and grow a group of people that I can mind control. No, they honestly believe what they're doing is the right way. And we fight them without realizing it's what's behind them. Our struggle is not at other people, and yet that's who we end up fighting. And we're dividing from them. The very people we need to be the group of sheep that can defend ourselves against Satan. And they do this, they do that, we're not supposed to do this, we can't do this, I don't agree with that, I'm distracted by this. Our struggle then becomes against flesh and blood. But it's against 3 different types of schemes that Satan throws at us. Rulers, those in charge. Authorities, those who carry out the policing and the punishments, and against the powers of this dark world, and against spiritual forces of evil in heavenly realms. We can't see our enemy. We can't touch them. A lot of times we can't hear them because they're coming at us. They're using other people. And is it possible that they can use you against other people? All right, so we need the full armor of God because we're not fighting a natural enemy, but a supernatural one. Therefore, he says, put on the panoply of God, the full armor, so that when the day of evil comes, and when will that be? Isn't it usually every day? Every moment of every day in some cases. So that when the day of evil comes, you will be able to stand your ground, and after you have done everything, in the literal Greek, the little word to is not there. You may be able to stand your ground, and after you have done everything, stand. there's really nothing for us to do. We have the full panoply of God, the full armor, and it's like the big sumo wrestler that's in the ring with this little scrawny guy. You're punching away at him. He's just... Then he pushes him aside. The match is over. That's how it is with Satan, but we don't see it that way, do we? We blame everything but Satan. Everyone but Satan. And just like Adam and Eve both. Well, she made me do it. The devil made me do it. You're responsible.
Heard a guy talking this week, he's talking about if something offends you, if your right eye offends you, pluck it out.
Yeah.
If your right arm offends you, cut it off.
Yeah.
And he said, Jesus was not talking about literally doing that. He was making a point. But he says, I'm going to ask you, what if that which offends you is your cell phone? Can you get rid of your cell phone? What if? What if that offends you is your computer? Can you live without a computer? And I thought these are some good applications here. He said, you've got to stop and think, what is it that's causing you to allow Satan to attack you?
Yeah. And Satan knows what it is. He's watched you a long time. No.
We put on the whole armor guard of God. At least we should. Time to leave a part or two off, right? But thank you for the grace of God, because we come up so woefully short. I mean,
yeah.
As the scriptures say, if a person says he doesn't sin, he's a liar. And we come up so woefully short.
Yeah.
It doesn't stop us from trying, but
Right.
we're going to still stub our toe probably each and every day.
Every day. And I picture that you brought my memory when I was reading this. I always picture myself getting knocked flat on my back because I didn't have the helmet on. I didn't have the sword, didn't have the shield. And God's picking me back. Now, why did you do that? And he's putting the helmet back. Now, why didn't you need to put the shield back in the arm? Why, like Jesus did when he picked up Peter. Oh, why did you doubt? You were walking, you were doing it. I can see God doing that too. Yeah. All right. What follows then, we'll pick up next time. He's looking at the soldier guarding him. Now, he's not listing these in order of importance, but he's just looking at the armor that the soldier is wearing and giving it a spiritual connotation that will help you against Satan's schemes. And take a look at those this week and do your best to add them to your collection of panoply. And put them on at work. Put them on at home. Put them on when you go to the store and when you're driving. I only know that because yesterday I got so mad at these truckers. And I used to be one. Yeah, so, all right, we'll pick up from there then. I guess in a couple weeks I'll not be here next week. So.